Hello and welcome to this short recording. This is about what happened to Germany during World War II, and we're starting off in the first couple of years of the war, 1939 to 1941. Good times. What I mean by good times is good times for Germany, because they conquered lots of territory in the first 2 years of World War II. So starting off in 1939 when they invaded Poland. There was then a 6-month period between September, October 1939 through to April 1940 where not a lot happened. In fact, in Britain it was called the Phony War. But then coming up to May 1940, Germany invaded France, and using their very successful blitzkrieg tactics, they practically took over France, Belgium and Holland within a very, very short period of time. By August 1940, Europe, or Western Europe, apart from obviously Britain, was under the control of Germany. The following spring, they helped out their Italian allies in Greece and Crete. They very quickly conquered Greece on the left and Crete on the right, using 25,000 paratroopers dropped into Greece in the spring of 1941. Following that, in June 1941, June the 22nd, the Germans launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, which initially was highly successful. From probably the summer of 1941 through to the summer of 1942, was very, very successful. You can have a look at the map here of mid-1942. The blue area is the area under the control of the Germans. Norway, Finland on Germany's side at that point. France had been occupied. Italy was part of the Axis powers. They were on the German side. Most of the Balkan states were under the control of the Germans, as well as large areas of North Africa as well. Some benefits for German people. So thinking about life on the home front during the first 2 years of the war, they could, they didn't have to worry about bombing raids during this period. There were fleeting raids by the British on Berlin, but generally speaking, they didn't have to worry. They could buy French and Belgian and products on the black market. Belgian chocolates, French wine being an example. Life practically carried on as it was in peacetime in Germany during the first 2 years of the war. Goebbels capitalized on German victories in his propaganda speeches, in his propaganda newsreels. There was a lot of support for Hitler. There was a lot of support for the war, and of course what Hitler had done in Western Europe, the Germans didn't think that was possible. So the morale in 1940 and 1941 was high, particularly up until the point they invaded the Soviet Union, invaded Russia. The only downside, I call it a downside, was the introduction of rationing into Germany, but even the rationing provided the Germans with a decent level of food and a decent level of clothing. So if we look at the graph, just to start off with, the first 2 years of the war, life on the home front in Germany was quite similar to what it was in peacetime. You've got your rationing, but very little bombing. The economy wasn't transformed into a full wartime economy in the first 2 years of the war. Moving on from that, things did start to change, and you could see 1942 as a turning point in the war for Germany. First of all, in December 1941, the Japanese attacked America at Pearl Harbour, and Hitler declared war on the United States in December 1941. America obviously reciprocated by declaring war on Germany, and they said that the priority for them was going to be Europe and not Asia. So lots of American troops began to arrive in North Africa and Europe in early to mid 1942. Towards the end of 1942, a massive battle began on the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad. This battle was fought over a 3-4 month period, November 42 to February 43. It was one of the most costly battles in certainly modern history. Hundreds of thousands died. 150,000 German prisoners of war, pictured on the left, were captured by the Russians. 80,000 Germans got killed. And eventually, Stalingrad was liberated by Soviet forces in February 43. It was a disaster for the Nazis, who had put in many of their best divisions into that battle. Following Stalingrad, Goebbels declared total war. This idea that the entire German economy and the entire German manpower and willpower would now be put into victory on all fronts. And you can have a look at the clip here, which shows what Goebbels said when he launched this plan.
February the 19th, 1943. Yesterday. At 5 p.m, the long-awaited rally at the Sports Palace began. The numbers were overwhelming. The gates had to be closed at 4:30. The atmosphere recalled a wild mood of mass hysteria. The people of Berlin are currently the most alert political audience we have in the Reich. Almost the entire cabinet, large numbers of regional directors and Gauleiters, and almost all the secretaries of state were present. This was indeed a cross-section of the entire German population.
Ich behaupten, das deutsche Volk wehrt sich gegen die totalen Kriegsmaßnahmen der Regierung. Es will nicht den totalen Krieg, sagen die Engländer, sondern die Kapitulation. Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg? Wollt ihr ihn, wenn nötig, totaler und radikaler, als wir ihn uns heute überhaupt erst vorstellen können? Den Führer in der Erkämpfung des Sieges durch dick und dünn und unter Aufnahme auf der schwersten persönlichen Belastungen zu folgen.
I was, I believe, in very good speaking form and elevated the rally into a state of total spiritual mobilization.
And obviously all of those things led to a downturn in German fortunes. In 1942, the British, along with the Americans, launched full-scale bombing of Germany. The British decided to do it by night. The Americans would do day raids, day bombing raids. Costly for the RAF and the US Air Force as well. But the devastation that was caused. Hamburg, 1942, a massive raid on Hamburg. 40,000 civilians got killed in that one. Later on, you saw similar raids on Dresden and Cologne and Berlin, where thousands of German civilians were killed. Did it hasten the war? Well, I'm not sure. Obviously, the effects on German citizens were that in some cases morale went down, but in a lot of cases, similar to the Blitz in Britain, the morale actually went higher. And the idea that I suppose a lot of British people felt it gave them more resilience, and the same thing applied in Germany, especially with the propaganda the Nazis were using during that time. But essentially by 1944, Russia, Britain, the United States and their allies have basically forced Germany back from where it was. The only notable country I suppose they've still got occupation of is Norway by 1945. The war essentially is lost, and most German people know that, and there are food shortages, the bombing raids have intensified, and of course finally you have the suicide of Adolf Hitler, where he kills himself, and the war comes to an end shortly. Within 7 days after Hitler's suicide, the war has ended. That is a summary of World War II and some of its effects on the German people.